the ancient trap China uses now. In 2017, Sri Lanka handed over control of Hambantota port to China, not through invasion, not through conquest, through a signature on a debt restructuring agreement, a lease for 99 years, a strategic deep-water port controlling Indian Ocean shipping lanes. Gone. This was not a mistake. It was a strategy perfected by empires millennia ago. A debt trap is not a failure of finance. It is a success of power. The mechanism changes, legions become loans, tributes become infrastructure contracts, but the outcome remains identical. One nation extends credit, another accepts it. And when repayment becomes impossible, sovereignty transfers from debtor to creditor. This pattern has repeated across centuries. Rome used it to absorb kingdoms without deploying a single legion. Colonial powers used it to control trade routes and resources. And today, China is using it to reshape global power. Most people do not recognize the trap until the transfer is complete, until the port is leased, until the railway is controlled, until the mine is collateralized. But to understand how this works today, you need to see the bait. China's Belt and Road Initiative launched in 2013 as infrastructure diplomacy. Roads connect landlocked nations to ports, railways cut through mountains, and energy grids power developing economies. The pitch was development, partnership, mutual growth. But the financial structure tells a different story. Belt and Road Initiative loans carry interest rates significantly higher than World Bank or Asian Development Bank standards. Contract terms remain non-transparent. Confidentiality clauses prevent borrowing nations from disclosing details or seeking competitive bids. And critically, these loans require collateral tied directly to national assets, including ports, utilities, mining rights, and strategic infrastructure. The targeting pattern is deliberate. China focuses on nations with strategic resources or important geography, but limited access to Western capital markets. These are countries that need infrastructure but lack the leverage to negotiate favorable terms. Pakistan, Kenya, Zambia, Sri Lanka, Djibouti. Nations positioned along critical trade routes or sitting on valuable resources. And here's the asymmetry that makes the trap effective. The Belt and Road Initiative projects predominantly use Chinese contractors, Chinese materials, Chinese labor. The debt flows into the borrowing nation's ledgers, but the actual capital circulates back through Chinese companies. Local employment remains minimal. Technology transfer stays limited. The economic multiplier effect that justifies infrastructure investment never materializes, which means the country takes on debt but doesn't generate the revenue growth needed to service it. This is where the concept of debt sustainability becomes critical. International lending institutions calculate whether a nation can realistically repay based on projected gross domestic product growth, export capacity, and existing debt burdens. Belt and Road Initiative loans routinely exceed these thresholds, not occasionally, systematically. When a country cannot meet payment schedules, renegotiation begins, but renegotiation under these contracts does not mean debt forgiveness or extended timelines. It means transferring control of the collateralized asset directly to China. The port becomes a Chinese-operated facility. The railway falls under Chinese management. The power grid answers to Chinese oversight. This is not accidental. The system is designed to create dependency, not partnership. The borrowing nation keeps its flag, its formal sovereignty, its seat at the United Nations. But the strategic decisions, like what ships dock at the port, what cargo moves on the railway, and where the power flows, are made elsewhere. Hambantota was not an anomaly. It was the mechanism working exactly as designed. This sounds modern, sophisticated 21st century financial engineering, but strip away the corporate language and you are looking at something far older. Rome didn't conquer the known world solely through military force. Legions were expensive, slow, visible. Financial dependency was cheaper, faster, and far more permanent. The Roman Empire perfected a system of control that did not require occupying every territory it dominated. They called them client kings, rulers allowed to keep their thrones, their titles, their appearance of sovereignty. But these kingdoms existed under Roman financial and strategic control. The mechanism was elegant. Rome would offer loans to neighboring kingdoms, gold to fund armies, capital to build infrastructure, credit to maintain stability during succession crises or crop failures. The term seemed reasonable at the time, better than conquest, better than annexation. But when repayment schedules came due, most client states discovered they could not meet the obligations. Their economies were not structured to generate the surplus needed to service Roman debt while maintaining their own administrative costs. So Rome offered an alternative: tribute. If you could not repay in currency, you paid in resources, grain shipments, mineral rights, timber, access to trade routes, military auxiliaries to support Roman campaigns. The progression was predictable. Financial dependency led to loss of policy autonomy, which eventually led to complete absorption into the empire. Egypt provides the clear example. Before Rome formally annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, it controlled Egyptian economic policy for decades through debt relationships. Roman creditors dictated grain export quotas. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and Rome needed to feed its urban population. They influenced monetary policy, ensuring Egyptian currency remained convertible and stable for Roman trade. They controlled access to Red Sea trade routes that connected Rome to African and Asian markets. The Ptolemaic dynasty still ruled. Egyptian priests still performed ceremonies. The administrative structure remained Egyptian. But every strategic decision, including what crops to prioritize, which trade agreements to sign, and how to allocate tax revenue, was made with Roman interests paramount. When Rome finally annexed Egypt, it was not a conquest. It was a formalization of control that already existed. The psychological component made this system devastatingly effective. Client states believed they were maintaining independence. They had their own kings, their own courts, their own laws, but independence is measured by the ability to make autonomous decisions. And client states had surrendered that capacity the moment they accepted loans they could not repay. Now look at belt and road contracts. Many of these agreements include clauses that give China influence over debtor nations' foreign policy decisions. They can impose restrictions on recognizing Taiwan, require support for Chinese positions in international forums, and limit security partnerships with countries China considers adversarial. Trade agreements often include preferential access clauses. Chinese companies receive priority for resource extraction, favorable terms for market access, and reduced tariffs that are not extended to other trading partners. Resource allocation decisions shift. A country that borrowed to build a port discovers the port primarily services Chinese shipping. A railway built with Chinese loans moves Chinese goods more efficiently than domestic products. The flag remains. The government remains. But the strategic autonomy that defines sovereignty has transferred. Rome understood something fundamental about power. Military occupation creates resistance. Debt creates compliance. You do not need to station legions in every territory when the territory's own economic survival depends on maintaining the relationship. Client kings enforced Roman interests more reliably than Roman governors ever could because their legitimacy depended on it. China has not invented a new strategy. They have revived an ancient one that worked for centuries. The core insight remains unchanged. Debt is cheaper, quieter, and more permanent than military occupation. And just like Rome, the cost becomes visible only when it is too late to reverse. Return to Hambantota port. Sri Lanka could not service $1.4 billion in debt. The solution was not debt forgiveness. It was a lease for 99 years that transferred operational control to China Merchants Port Holdings. What does this mean in practice? Chinese naval vessels now dock at a port that controls one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The port that was supposed to generate revenue for Sri Lanka instead generates strategic advantage for China. Sri Lanka still owns the port on paper, but ownership without control is sovereignty in name only. The pattern is repeating across multiple continents. Zambia's national power utility, ZESCO, faces potential seizure over unpaid Chinese loans. If that transfer occurs, China controls electricity distribution for the entire nation. Kenya's standard gauge railway, built with Chinese loans, operates at a loss. The Kenyan government diverts revenue from other sources to service the debt. If default occurs, operational control transfers to China, giving China influence over East Africa's primary trade corridor. Djibouti leased its primary port to China for 10 years and then extended the lease when debt pressures mounted. That port hosts the only permanent Chinese military base in Africa, and it controls access to the Red Sea. The compounding effect makes escape nearly impossible. Losing control of one asset makes servicing other debts harder. Revenue that should service Loan B is diverted to prevent losing Asset A, and that increases the likelihood of defaulting on Loan C. It is a cascade, and each transfer makes the next one more likely. Many BRI contracts include confidentiality clauses that prevent countries from disclosing terms publicly or seeking competitive bids from other lenders. This eliminates the possibility of refinancing at better rates or negotiating more favorable terms. The debtor is locked into the relationship, and the creditor knows it. The geopolitical outcome is clear. China is gaining control over global choke points without military conflict. Ports that control maritime trade, energy infrastructure that powers economies, telecommunications networks that carry data. This mirrors the Roman client-state system perfectly. Rome didn't need to formally annex every territory. Financial dependency achieved the same result with less resistance and lower cost. Once financial dependency reaches a certain threshold, formal sovereignty becomes performative. The government still meets, laws are still passed, but the critical decisions, the ones that determine a nation's strategic direction, are constrained by the creditor's interests. Not every Belt and Road Initiative project follows this pattern. Some infrastructure investments generate genuine economic returns. Some loans are serviced successfully. But when you map debt levels against asset transfers, the pattern is undeniable. The trap isn't theoretical, it's documented, repeating, expanding. Sovereignty transfers from debtor to creditor. The method changes, the outcome does not. Rome built an empire on roads and loans. Client kings paid tribute in grain and gold. The mechanism was debt. The result was control. China is building an empire on ports and infrastructure. Developing nations pay tribute in strategic assets and policy alignment. The mechanism is debt. The result is control. The pattern isn't hidden, it's historical record. The question is whether we recognize it before the transfer is complete. If you like clear, grounded history on wealth and power, like this video, and subscribe to the Origins of Wealth.